of November 2025. We have present in the meeting Councillors Allison, Anderson, Brown, Carmichael, Chalmers, Clark, Convery. Councillor Cooper is trying to join the meeting at the moment. She's not present at the moment. We have present Councillors Devlin, Fagan, Ferguson Miller. We have apologies from Councillor Freeman, Councillor Johnson Dempsey is substituting. We have present Councillor Keat. We have apologies from Councillor Kerr and Councillor Handibod is substituting. We have present Councillors Lambie, Logan, Loudon, McCallan, McClymont, Leslie MacDonald, McLachlan, Nelson, Ray. We have apologies from Councillor Razak and Councillor Cowies substituting, and we have present Councillors Robb, Ross, Shearer and Walker, and I'll hand back to the Chair.
Okay, thank you very much. If I can come then to today's business. But before I do, I just want to draw your attention to one of the items of the agenda. Item 11 will be a report from the Chief Social Work Officer. It will be his annual report, and this will be Liam Purdy's last annual report as our Chief Social Work Officer. So I'm sure you would all join me in wishing Liam the very best for his retirement. Okay.
As he smiles.
And beams across the room. Okay. Come down to item 1, which are declarations of interest. Are there any declarations of interest? There are none. Come to item 2, which are the minutes of the previous meeting. Are there any questions of the minutes of the previous meeting? Not seeing any questions. Can we agree those as a correct record?
Agreed.
Come now to item 3, which is that is agreed. Come now to item 3, which is the revenue budget monitoring paper, and I will ask Jackie Taylor to speak to this report. Jackie.
Thank you, Chair. This is our revenue budget monitoring for the period to the 5th of September this year. Section 4 of the report reports that we are projecting an outturn position for our general services budget of break-even. From section 4.3 onwards, we are providing an update on some budget areas. At 4.3, we pick up on teacher numbers and reduced class contact time. I have advised committee previously that we have been advised that there's no longer a need for us to restore teacher numbers to the higher level that we discussed previously, and there was an underspend, therefore, in the budget that was transferred to reserves. But we also discussed at previous committees the risk around reducing class contact time for teachers. National discussions are still ongoing in this area, and the point has been made that if this is to be introduced, then we would be looking for funding from the Scottish Government to allow that to happen. If we don't get full funding for any introduction of reduced class contact time, then the savings that the Council makes would be higher than if funding was provided. In relation to pay award, that's covered at section 4.5 of the report. There has been agreement on pay award for staff groups excluding teachers. Negotiations are ongoing, and until there is an agreed position, there remains a risk to the costs of pay for the Council across all staff groups. Pick up at section 4.6, the packaging extended producer responsibility. We've discussed this previously at committee. This is the scheme that is designed to drive producers of packaging waste to reduce the amount of waste. We had confirmation of £7.7 million of funding that comes from DEFRA, and we'd previously reported around the issues about funding beyond 25-26 and the uncertainty of councils being able to continue to reap the benefit of that funding. It was agreed this year that in addition to our staffing structure at a cost of £305,000 per annum over a 2-year period would be introduced using some of the funding we received. The remainder of the funding of £7.1 million was allocated to Community and Enterprise Resources budget for costs associated with collection of household waste. That released core budget, and that resulted in an underspend of £7.1 million. We will pick up later in the agenda on the budget and savings proposals paper options around how that money is introduced. Is utilised. At section 4.8, I'm reporting that the Executive Committee back in August did note that certainty around funding in 25-26 and beyond, and we agreed that clarity would be sought in relation to this by writing to the Scottish Government. A response was received on the 8th of October and stated that it was intended that the funding that we received from DEFRA would in future years replace equivalent funding in the local government settlement, but that decisions for 26-27 and beyond would be a matter for the Scottish Budget and the Spending Review, and the budget engagement process between the Government and COSLA was the appropriate forum for that discussion. Also picking up in this report at 4.10 around loan charges, as is normal at this point in the year, we are looking at our loan charge outturn and taking into account the impact of borrowing levels that we've had this year and interest rates and we'll report that to a future meeting of the committee. We're also reporting at section 5, the housing revenue account position, and we're reporting a break-even position as outturned for the year. So in terms of the recommendations, we're asking that the break-even position on the general fund is noted and the break-even position expected for the housing revenue account is also noted. Thanks, Chair.
Okay, thank you very much, Jackie. Can I ask if there are any questions on that report? Could you please indicate now? I don't see any questions, so can we agree the recommendations? Agreed. We're agreed. Thank you very much. Come now to item 4, which is the capital budget monitoring paper, and I'll come back to Jackie Taylor to speak to that report. Jackie.
Thank you, Chair. So capital budget monitoring for the same period up to the 5th of September. Section 4 of the report, we're reporting that we have a programme for general fund capital of £68.9 million. There are some adjustments proposed and they are detailed in Appendix 1. I'll cover those in a second. However, we have pulled out in Section 4.3 an update on one of those adjustments that's proposed, and that's around an upgrade that is required for our headquarters heating system. The cost of that project is £1.5 million. 150,000 of that is required in the current financial year and will be funded from our current year's prioritised urgent investment budget. The remaining budget would be the first call on next year's capital programme and also further year's prioritised urgent investment budgets. Section 4.5, we're reporting that we are forecasting to spend our full budget on capital this year, and the actual spend position as at the 5th of September was just under £13.5 million. Housing programme is covered at Section 5 of the report. We have a housing capital programme of £87.7 million. We are projecting that we will maximise spend and look to spend all of that this year, and we are noting at 5.5 an additional £1.6 million of funding was received for affordable housing, and that will be included within the programme. If I just take you to Appendix 1 and those adjustments that I mentioned earlier, on page 22 we have a number of adjustments under community and enterprise resources that reflect the spend profiles that are expected for projects. They include Clydesdale Way, the Play Parks project, White Bridge replacement and Overton Bandstand. At the bottom of the page we have North Halfway Hall and additional funds that have been received through developer contributions, which will contribute towards some upgrades in that hall. Over the page, on page 23, we have the item around the headquarters heating that I mentioned a second ago, and also funds that are being met from the IT Development Fund for the upgrade of our website. So if I take you back to the recommendations, we're asking that the position on the general fund and housing capital programmes are noted, that the adjustments in Appendix 1 are approved, and to note that the programmes will continue to be monitored by the Financial Resources Scrutiny Forum. Thanks, Chair.
Okay, thank you very much, Jackie. If there are any questions, could I ask you to indicate now? I would come in the first instance to Kirsten Robb.
Thank you. Okay, so the heating upgrade project, the paper highlights that there's no climate impacts and there's no need for an integrated impact assessment. I'm pleased there's now been one being done and circulated to members last night, but I want to make a couple of points about the process here. Just remind people that these need done early in the process so that members, we've got a duty as a council to reduce emissions. This project could increase emissions and also gives the opportunity for officers to work together to fulfil this duty and for members to scrutinise it, and that hasn't really happened properly this time, and I'd like that to be taken on board for next time as well. There's the reason why we have these IAs is that people can work together to attract funding or to look at different options to mitigate emissions, and we have a statutory duty to do that as a council, so we need to remember that, and that members have to scrutinise it. The second point here is that IA actually highlights proposing a gas boiler could have an adverse impact on emissions, and we're all seeing the costs of these now, financial and human costs to emissions increases. So can I ask if the biomass boilers were looked at as an alternative to a gas boiler, because that could reduce emissions here but still provide the urgent boiler that the authority is looking to fulfil the need for the centre, and if not, why not? And if not, can we procure the most efficient boiler we can to try and bring down emissions? That's the point of the IA process, that we work together across different departments to get the best solutions. The final point is on the estate strategy, can ask for a report to see how many other boilers are beyond their natural life, so that we can take the time to anticipate and plan to replace with non-fossil fuel boilers in the future, rather than what we're doing here is £1.5 million into a fossil fuel boiler. We're locking in emissions for future, so going against what we're supposed to be doing as an authority. Thank you.
Okay. I'm going to come to Stephen, I think, to pick up on that question. Before I do, I would highlight, although it's not in the report, we are embarked on a process, we're some way into a process now of looking at a district heating proposal for Almada Street, so it might be useful to touch on that, and I see we also have the rest of the team there, but I'll pass over to Stephen and his team now. Stephen?
Yeah, thanks, Chair. Thanks, Councillor Robb. I'll start to answer. I might ask Craig to join in to assist at some point. And to try and answer all of the questions in terms of the question about the estate strategy, that's something that we will be looking at. We're looking at every building within scope, and we're looking at net zero requirements to try and get those net zero requirements met within timescales, always understanding that at present Scottish local authorities don't have any budgets for this, so we can understand what needs to be done and when, but finding the money for that is going to be more complex because there is no funding that comes with that, but it's something that's certainly in track. Looking at the boiler itself that we're proposing to replace, we will replace with the most energy efficient model that we can, and that's something that we've talked about, and we will be doing that. We wouldn't be looking at biomass at this stage, but we are looking to take the most energy efficient boiler that we can to make sure that we've got a resilient office and heating system certainly for the short to medium term. Longer term, this building will be is already part of a feasibility study that's part of the agreed LHE strategy, an LHE strategy and action plan. We're looking at, we've received funding for a feasibility study that includes this building and 20 other local buildings round about here. It's a mix of offices, residential, commercial and retail are all in scope. That feasibility study has started. We're expecting to receive the results of the feasibility study by March 2026, and thereafter moving to the outline business case for it. So the expectation is that, that this is one of the key projects identified within the LHEs, and it's something we're really keen to do, and we've identified strategic partners who are keen to work with us. So whilst at the moment we're talking about a gas-fired system, please be assured that we've always, for a long time now, we've been planning to make this a fossil-free office, of a fossil-free heating system, and we'll be doing that through the LHEs and through the feasibility study that's ongoing just now.
Okay, thank you. Kirsten, do you want to come back on that?
Yeah, thank you. And why not a biomass boiler, and just maybe touching on the IIA process a wee bit in the point I'm making about there. Thanks.
Craig? Oh, hang on.
Thank you. In terms of the biomass boiler, there were a number of options considered by a consultant when brought in to do that feasibility assessment. Biomass wasn't deemed as appropriate solution at this time. The main reason for that is we were looking at a mid-term solution to the heating system in this building. What we have done is, because of the condition of the two boilers, one is now completely out of use at all. The other boiler is still being repaired as and when required. What we've done starting in the summer is implement a procurement process to get temporary plant put in, and that's been procured, now installed, and it was actually commissioned yesterday. So as a backup through the winter months, that is now fully in place, which is reassuring. The detailed design of the replacement steam boiler run by gas is currently underway. We will have carbon reduction figures worked out early in the new calendar year, and we can pass that on at the time. We'll also be looking at the control systems, making sure that's efficient as it possibly can be, while we are working towards a completely clean energy source through the district heating network, and there's conversations happening around that just now, and we've got funding to do feasibility study on that as well. So things are progressing, but there was an immediate issue with clearly the boilers in this building. We had to reach an appropriate and measured solution.
Okay. Can I maybe just pick up that final point? So the paper advises that an integrated impact assessment was not required, and then we received one the other day. So what's the thinking for any of you behind the change in thinking there? Sorry.
Yeah, I think it was just early in the process. It wasn't viewed as being required. Clearly, we've amended that now, and they'll be moving forward. Any project like this will be in scope to do an IIA.
Okay. Okay. Could I come now to Robert Brown?
Yes, thanks very much, Chair. Really on the same point, the issue, obviously, with the district heating scheme that's kind of a little bit further into the future, can I just have a reassurance that the work that's currently being done will not, if you like, have to be duplicated. It'll match what is possible under the district heating scheme, so there won't be, if you like, double expenditure on that one. And secondly, on the issue that you touched on before of control, I think it's notorious that this building, you're either freezing cold or boiling hot. Will the new system have a more sophisticated level of control to hopefully avoid that sort of problem?
Thank you. So on the actual boiler replacement itself, the minimum life we would expect out of the replacement boilers is 15 years. That would clearly see us through to a completely clean energy source. When the district heating system goes into this building, at whatever time that ends up being, the replacement boilers would act as a backup to that should it fail. So the original intention for any of these systems is there should be some backup, whether it's for hot water only or heating and hot water. So it's not wasted expenditure, because that would sit there as a backup should the district heating system fail for whatever reason. And in terms of controls, as part of the replacement boiler, which will be happening next year, the control side of it will be looked at. What I think you're talking about is clearly the zoning of that in each of the areas. We'll need to have a look at that just to see exactly how that's currently set up and what can and can't be done at this stage. But I'll take a note of that, and we'll get a look at that through the detailed design phase.
Okay, could I come now to Norman Ray?
Thank you, Chair. Yeah, just to continue on the same subject, really. I think you've answered my first question, which is about carbon reduction figures. How much less will those be as a result of greater efficiency? But I think you've said those will be coming. And similarly, also, will we have figures on how much financial saving there will be from that greater efficiency?
Yeah, the efficiency levels will be worked out at the same time, because in essence that will generate what the actual carbon saving would be as well. So although they are a straight replacement with the same technology, clearly there will be a more efficient version of that. So similar to gas boilers, which are rated, we need to work out what that alternative efficiency is and how we can quantify that. So that will be part of that detailed design phase.
Thank you.
Okay, thank you. And can I come to Alec Allison?
Yeah, a number of the questions have been answered. Thank you, Joe. But just could we hear a little bit more about the assessments you made of other renewable sources of power? We continually extol air source heat pumps, and admittedly in much smaller buildings, ground source heat pumps and solar panels to be able to negate some of the energy requirements. Have we evaluated the use of any of these?
Thank you. Thanks for the question. Yes, we did, as part of that initial feasibility study. Ground source and air source are pretty difficult in the current environs of this building, because we just simply don't have the space to do it properly. PV, again, is limited to get the level of contribution we'd need based on the investment you would need. So the longer term plan has always been a district heating network by whatever source, because clearly that is the most efficient version of how we would get to net zero. The issue has been simply the condition of the current building and it deteriorating faster than we expected. So that's the reason we've had to put this mid-term solution in, albeit that money will not be wasted because it will be backup generation for any district heating system that goes in the future.
Thank you.
Okay. And can I just ask, for the benefit of the committee, the heating system that we have at present, it has, I think it was expected to last 20 years or something like that. How long has that current heating system lasted for?
63.
63 years. So, I mean, this is something that we need to modernise. But I dare say that many years ago, somebody got their money's worth out of it. So, thank you very much. Okay, are there any other questions on this report? Then, can I say, noting the fact that an integrated impact assessment has obviously been circulated, can I ask us to agree the recommendations?
Agreed.
We're agreed. Can I come now to item 5, which is an update on funding, and can I ask Jackie Taylor to speak to this report? Jackie.
Thank you, Chair. So this is a regular report on update to funding that we've received. At section 3.3 of the report, I detail that in Appendix 1 we have 2 areas where we've received additional funding. If I pick them up, firstly on page 30, we've got funding for the Social Heating Net Zero Heat Fund, which is in relation to smart storage heater controls. We had £70,000. And we've also received that £1.650 million that I mentioned earlier around affordable housing supply. I've also detailed in the report at section 4 some information around Pride in Place funding. It's been confirmed that South Lanarkshire has been selected as a recipient of one award under the UK Government's Pride in Place programme, which will fund up to £20 million over 10 years. The successful neighbourhood within South Lanarkshire will be established later this year. The Scottish local authorities that have been selected based on their share of areas with the highest deprivation levels and weakest social infrastructure. And there'll be criteria that is assessed when we are told which area this will be, and they're detailed at the top of page 28 for your information. In the communication that we've received just at the end of October, a list of those high-need intermediate zones were provided. It is worthy of note that 10 of the highest-need intermediate zones in South Lanarkshire listed includes 5 of the top 10 are within the Hamilton and Clyde Valley constituency. What we're now being asked to do is return a questionnaire. The report details that those questionnaires are sought by the 7th of November. We've now had an extension of 1 week to get information back. And we've to identify at least 1 or more potential neighbourhoods for each of the 4 eligible UK parliamentary constituencies. We do expect to be notified later in the year what the successful area will be. Going forward, there's an expectation that a neighbourhood board is established, and I've given some information on section 4.7 around how that will be set up. So in terms of the recommendations in this report, we're asking that the additional funding totalling £1.7 million is detailed and the update in relation to Pride in Place funding is noted. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you very much. Can I ask if there are any questions in this report? Could you please indicate now? And I'll come to Katie Loudon.
Thanks very much, Chair, and thanks for the report, Jackie. I'd like to talk about the Pride in Place funding, Chair, so I've got a few questions around that. I'll say at the outset that I'd welcome the funding, as I would with any more funding for our council, insofar as it goes. The big headline figures that we've seen on social media are, of course, over 10 years, and this is happening in the context of other UK funding, such as the Shared Prosperity funding, for example, being slashed for our region. Onto the papers, at 4.3, the papers state that along with the letter from the UK Government of the 20th of October, that this list was provided of the high-need intermediate zones in South Lanarkshire. Now, Chair, I completely understand why we don't have that list included here, because it would be an incredibly high volume of data to be dealing with, to be included in papers, and in fact that officers are having to deal with just now. We also haven't been sent this kind of information, additional information as councillors, although again I do understand why, because it's a very tight, quite a bafflingly tight, to be honest, turnaround, although it's good to hear that we've got an extra week for it. I do know that it's been provided to MSPs and that this data such as population size and SIMD figures is of course available to us as well. Chair, I've got a series of 3 linked questions here that I'd like to ask in turn once I've got an answer for each, with your indulgence, please.
Okay, let's go with number 1 then.
Okay, thank you. It's just to check, so am I correct in understanding that council officers are going to be completing the same task on our behalfs as MSPs have been asked to do? So essentially they've been asked to identify what are being called these proposed neighbourhood areas on the basis of the data and according to an allowed population size range as well when they're being put together. And are we on track for that now, especially that we've got this 1-week extension?
Okay, Jackie.
Thank you. What we've been asked to do is complete a questionnaire, which effectively is to provide information, maps, social information around each of those areas that we mentioned. So we have to provide at least 1 per constituency area. So that's what we're being asked to do. We're not being asked to make any assumptions around how that money will be spent. It's just that kind of core information in that questionnaire we've been asked.
Okay.
Right. Thanks, Jackie. So is it the same questionnaire that MSPs have got where they're asked to start to identify areas at the first question, the neighbourhood areas?
I'm not cited on what MSPs have been asked around, but I don't believe it's the same.
Okay, that's really helpful, thanks. So my second question is about the process of actually bringing these zones together into neighbourhood areas. So a wee bit more about how that process is actually going to happen would be useful, especially considering that what the council have been asked to do is then potentially different from what other people are being asked to do just now. So I was interested in that part of 4.3 where it says the greatest proportion, 5 out of 10 of these intermediate zones are within Hamilton and Clyde Valley constituency. So without naming them, because I don't think that's the right thing to do, I had a wee look at where these 5 areas are. And there's actually 2 that are only really anywhere near each other that would make sense to put together as a zone, which a neighbourhood area, as we've been asked to call them, that would make funding, and the others are a bit spread out, like sort of points in a compass. And I had to look at where I live, which is the areas named and the list, the Rutherglen constituency zone, and its immediately neighbouring zone. Now, these are 2 places which are both on the list as areas of high needs, but there's 11 other areas which are actually sitting between them, if you look at the ranking. So if they were placed together, and what this funding is supposed to be doing is to place areas together in ways that would be easily recognised and would be easily understood by local residents as part of a community, my reading of this is it would mean that we'd be skipping over, potentially, like these 11 higher need areas, or adding in lower priority areas in the case of Hamilton and Clyde Valley for the sake of meeting this sort of near each other criteria. It seems to me to be a bit strange way of doing it. And I think going forward, whether that's just now or whether it's further down the line, it's an incredibly difficult task that our officers have actually been set here, essentially drawing lines on a map. At 4.2, it says the UK government are expecting a weighting towards higher ranking zones, although lower ranking zones can be included. So have officers got any idea if they are asked to participate in this process of putting these areas together, how are we going to start going about that complex task of putting areas together? And is it something that we anticipate is going to be, is it going to extend longer than the deadline we've potentially got? And are we as councillors going to be able to scrutinise the rationale that's been used to put these neighbourhoods together when that's available?
Thank you. In terms of the approach that we're taking here, obviously you've referred to, on page 28, those criteria that we've been asked to. So obviously officers will be looking at those criteria, but also looking at those top intermediate zones that have been identified for us. So that process will look at those particular ones and look to, where appropriate, if we're looking at areas near each other, that would be what's considered. But at the moment, the focus is on those intermediate zones that we've been provided with. The ask is that we put in at least 1 for each constituency area. Mm-hmm. So that's another criteria that obviously we have to be following, if that helps.
Okay.
Yeah, that's really helpful. Thanks. So I've got one more question, Chair. So essentially, for each constituency, one of these zones is going to be created based on these sort of rankings as the sort of ultimate aim. Sorry, that wasn't that was a statement. Chair, that wasn't my one last question. I do have one last question, and I apologise for the length of this, everyone. It is just really quite complex, as you can see. I'm not going to labour this point too much because I know Councillor Clark's going to explore this further in a second, but I was really pleased that on a cross-party basis at COSLA last week, there were some points made around concerns about this, where all political parties were agreeing that these criteria, as per the information that we have just now, do seem to be really restrictive. And of course, there's the complete removal and disregard of local decision-making in terms of our council structures that exist at the moment. So I do want to finish by asking about decision-making. So it's my understanding that we've been asked about pre-existing government programmes, funding streams that are in place in a proposed neighbourhood, like, for example, Scottish Government Empowering Communities programme, and been asked about any organisations that are involved in regeneration. Are we getting the chance to specifically outline any of our own pre-existing community planning work or community planning structures? And is the officer response that's going in, not Friday now, but next Friday, is it going to include details of our own community planning work, community planning structures, and the fantastic work of our community engagement teams?
Thank you. So the questionnaire, as you say, will pick up on some of those themes. It is around what other funding's there, the social position of some of those areas. And obviously we'll take the opportunity to raise linkages that we have with community planning and the team that Tom oversees in terms of the information that they hold around each of those areas. So absolutely we'll take the opportunity to do that.
Sorry, Chair, I just have one supplementary on that. That's great. I think that's really important to do. Are we going to have details in that questionnaire as well, or would we anticipate that this is something that might happen further down the line, where we talk about existing structures that have already been set up within some of our communities? So the work the incredible work that's been done over the past few years to actually get out to communities to make sure they've got capacity for decision making, that they've got support. And that all that sort of community empowerment work that's been done and that actually exists at the moment, is that going to be fed into this process? Like, as in naming areas and talking about the work that has been done here, the work that's been done in Hill House, the work that's been done in Westburn, that kind of thing.
Right, thanks, Chair, and thanks, Councillor Loudon, for the question. Yeah, those linkages will be made, and we'll be looking to bring that out in the questionnaires that are submitted. Just being aware that there's that two-stage process. The neighbourhood boards would be set up at some point in the future, and I would expect that dialogue to be continued through that process as well.
Okay. Can I come now to Ross Clark?
Thank you, Chair, and thank you to Jackie for the report. I agree with the points made by my SNP colleague Councillor Loudon. Additional investment in South Lanarkshire is welcome, but it's clear that South Lanarkshire and Scotland as a whole have been shortchanged by the UK Government. I'm therefore proposing an amendment to the paper that we write to the UK Government conveying these concerns. I'm aware the amendment is ready to be circulated, but I shall speak to it just now. Let's start with Scotland first, receiving far less than our population share, meaning a huge undercut in funding of up to around 138 million, a share of which could have been coming to South Lanarkshire. Now, South Lanarkshire itself is receiving a generous share of the money coming to Scotland, but it's still lower than our UK population share, shortchanging us of millions that could be invested in our communities. And let's be real here, up to 20 million over 10 years, although welcome, isn't much to shout about. Even if you assume the 2% annual inflation rate target from now, in 10 years' time, it'll only be worth about 16.4 million in today's money. Or if you use today's rate, then that goes down to under 14 million. And I repeat the point, it's up to 20 million. There's no guarantee of us even receiving the full amount. They've taken the previous government's levelling up agenda and turned it into levelling down. We in the SNP have more ambition for Scotland and South Lanarkshire. One thing, though, they have taken from the Levelling Up agenda is the involvement of MPs, as if they know more than we or our communities do about the issues affecting our local areas. There's no consideration of our existing community planning structures. What happens if the MP and the council disagree about who to appoint these neighbourhood boards? Specifically, and it details this in the paper, the plan is that one councillor will sit on these boards, but doesn't give any extra detail of how they will be appointed. If it's similar to the appointment of chair, then we could have the possibility of Labour MPs only putting forward or accepting Labour councillors. It overreaches into devolved areas. COSLA and our councils have been bypassed in design of the scheme, and there's a blatant disregard for local decision-making, running roughshod over the democratically elected Scottish Parliament and our local authorities, who are clearly an afterthought. As I said, we have more ambition for Scotland, and we expect better for our communities. The UK Government could spend its time making real transformation and real positive change. They could scrap, for example, the two-child cap affecting thousands in South Lanarkshire, something which the Scottish Government is being forced to mitigate. They could reverse their national insurance hike, which is damaging the council and public services. They could provide Scotland with its fair share in real terms uplifts in funding so that we can invest in South Lanarkshire's communities. Councillor Loudon spoke of the restrictive criteria, and it's no surprise that I agree with her, but it may come as a surprise that seemingly the leader of the council also agrees, because as Councillor Loudon referred to, I'm aware that a very similar position to our amendment was agreed at COSLA cross-party, including the leader of the council. There was agreement that there's been a lack of consultation or engagement with COSLA. There was agreement that the criteria is restrictive and that there's been the removal of local decision-making. So in similar spirit of that cross-party agreement, I'd ask that committee support the amendment. Thank you.
Okay. Yeah, I think Councillor Loudon, did you say, was seconding your motion, your amendment, and that's on the paper that you've circulated, but can I just confirm that just now for the committee? Yes? Okay. Before I come back to that, are there any other questions on the paper itself? No? And any other points? Okay, let me make a few. First of all, you're absolutely right. COSLA did agree a position the other day in which we expressed some concerns about the way this funding has been allocated. What COSLA did not agree, I have to say, were to some of the more political points and party political points that were made by Councillor Clark there at the end of his, or in his remarks and at the end of his recommendation. So if I could just say, in terms of the points that have been made, I think there is validity to some of these technical points that have been made earlier and some of the earlier questioning from Councillor Loudon. There are issues around how this scheme has been developed. I'll come back to that in a second. As for the more political points, if only the SNP group in this committee were as animated about a Scottish Government cutting funding to this local authority area as they were about a UK Government investing more money in this local authority area, we would all be in a better place. And of course, the reason that we have £20 million in this Pride of Place scheme coming to South Lanarkshire is that the good people of South Lanarkshire turfed out the SNP last year and elected a Labour government. Now, in terms of the less political points, I think the points which do have validity, we are continuing to engage with the Scotland Office. There are clearly questions that we've covered earlier that emerge from the proposals. You've heard today about how this scheme has been developed. I think it's important to stress that this is funding that is coming to South Lanarkshire. It's not funding that is coming specifically to South Lanarkshire Council. So ideas as to how that funding can be allocated can be put forward from a number of sources. In terms of the position that I think it makes sense for the Council to agree today, it is not the SNP amendment. It is the recommendations in the paper, but perhaps to bring us into line with COSLA and that position, because as leader, I've always argued for the best outcome for South Lanarkshire, regardless of who is in power in central government. And so I would suggest that if there is an additional recommendation to be made, that we place an additional recommendation where we welcome the £20 million award to South Lanarkshire, but that we endorse those calls from across local government for better engagement with the Scotland Office, specifically on those issues around the design and development and implementation of Pride in Place funding and the criteria that is being used. And if Councillor Convery would be content to second that, I'd be happy for that to become the motion today. Councillor Clark, you pressed your button.
Thank you, Chair. Just to clarify something, pretty much most of this amendment is very similar to the position agreed by COSLA. We would be able to remove the very last recommendation about the allocation of funding if that would make the amendment agreeable, because this is pretty much the cross-party agreement that was reached.
Mm-hmm. I don't have the exact wording of the COSLA position in front of me, but that sounds like something we could work on and agree. I think the issue we have there is that there are different funding streams that come to local government. Some, as you pointed out, will come through the Barnett process, and some are coming directly to local authorities, and UK funding streams are in a bit of flux. So, well, it's a tempting political point, I'm sure, for nationalists to make. It's not necessarily something that we can stack up. And so there wasn't that universal agreement on that point, and that was dropped. But there was an agreement reached on the other concerns about the way this has been funded. If you just give me a wee moment to check, I will come back to you, but that might be a way for consensus to break out and for the committee to adopt universal positions. So just give me a second here. Right, okay. I think it would be fair to say maybe the point about community planning structures wasn't necessarily explicitly made, but we do have through the neighbourhood boards the opportunity to make those links with community planning partners. And I think in all our submissions, we want to highlight the Marmot work and some of the work that we are doing as a local authority. So just bear with me a second. So see if we drop that last bit, and it's further concern about the overall allocation of 292 million. If we drop from there, are we content to agree that then? And that appears to be consistent with the COSLA position. The bit that goes a bit further is the stuff around community planning, but I think we've done some pretty good work in community planning across the authority, and we've got some good examples in community planning that we can seek to highlight through this process where we've done good work, whether it's the strategic stuff around Marmot or the locality level work that we're doing through our community engagement teams. People content with that? Councillor Clark.
Thank you. So just confirming the amendment is staying the same up until the deletion of after in relation to delivery, just taking out that last point.
Yep, content with that. Okay.
There you go.
Right, we are agreed. Can I come now to item 6? Which is on the appointments to South Lanarkshire Licensing Division number 2 board, and Ian Strachan is going to speak to this. Ian.
Morning. Yep. Thank you, Chair. Purpose of the report: seek appointment of 2 elected members to the South Lanarkshire Licensing Division number 2, the East Kilbride area. Councillor Roberts intimated her resignation from the East Kilbride Licensing Board. As set out in the report on the basis of political composition of the relevant wards, the 2 vacancies would be for the Labour group to fill. Councillor Devlin has been nominated, but the group are unable to propose a second nomination at this time. So on the basis of the above, the remaining vacancy is available for another elected member. So looking to approve the following recommendations: appointment of Councillor Devlin to the board, and then seek another member nomination. Happy to take any questions.
Okay, Okay, thank you. Can I come to David Shearer?
Thank you, Chair. The SNP group doesn't have any problems with this report. However, given that there's still a place to be filled, we would propose that Councillor Gladys Miller fill that last position.
I'm content with that. I'm content with that. Councillor Clark?
Just to confirm that I will second that nomination.
Okay, I'm content with that. I should say that the reason Councillor Devlin has been appointed there just now is that she has already undergone the licensing training. So although she's not a member of that particular board, she's able to fulfil that vacancy until such time as we are ready to make another nomination. But any other nomination would have to be someone that undergoes the relevant training. Okay. I'm content with that. Are we agreed?
Agreed.
Agreed. Thank you. Could I come now to item 7, which is the South Lanarkshire Local Development Plan Evidence Report. And I'll ask Fraser Carlin to speak to this item. Fraser.
Okay, thanks, Chair. Yeah, this paper relates to a key stage in the production of the Local Development Plan for South Lanarkshire, and it's the evidence report that we're bringing to the Executive Committee for consideration prior to presenting to the Council meeting in December, which we're obliged to do in terms of the Planning Acts. The LDP has been subject to presentations to members, progress updates to the Planning Committee since approval was given to begin work on it in 2023. And since then, our officers have been involved in consultation with communities, engagement with stakeholders and research into a whole host of relevant planning-related topics. The actual report stretches to around 1,000 pages, which we have sought to summarise in links within this report, with hard copies available to view in the members' library. The evidence report does not set policy, but it flags up issues that we have evidence in our research and consultation. This includes research into how South Lanarkshire will assess and provide for our housing need over the next 10 years, as well as gaps in infrastructure and matters such as availability of employment land. The evidence report itself is premised around a range of topics which follow the themes in the National Planning Framework, and this is submitted to the Scottish Government who, if they are satisfied that we have suitably engaged with stakeholders, will then instruct the Council to prepare a development plan. Once submitted, the Government will appoint a reporter from the Department of Environmental Appeals who will take around 6 months to assess our research and our evidence and hopefully provide us with the green light to proceed to produce a development plan. We will then begin a call for ideas from landowners, communities and developers which we can then assess, and this will be assessed against our evidence and our infrastructure needs. And the outcome of this will be included in a new development plan which we will again present to Council for approval, probably in late 2027 before seeking Scottish Government ratification. So I hope that this paper, the relevant links and the recommendations set out in paragraph 2.1 are acceptable to members of the Executive, and that this information be presented to Council for formal approval prior to submission to the Scottish Government. Thank you.
Thank you. Can I ask if there are any questions on this report? Alec.
Thanks, Chair. I agree with the statement that this is a very important paper and a stage in a process that started 2 years ago, and that it's going to take 6 months to evaluate. Therefore, it's very difficult for us with just over a week's notice to be able to look at it in any sort of detail. And therefore, my comments are going to be more general, Fraser, than specific. Although the first thing is you communicate with the 7 local authorities in the city region. Well, out in Clydesdale, that bears no relevance. The ones that are relevant to Clydesdale specifically will be Borders, Dumfries and Galloway, and to another extent, East Ayrshire and West Lothian. And being able to communicate with them, and if it's in there, again, I apologise, I can't read it, I couldn't read it all. There are a number of areas that I believe are problematic at the moment, and I think a new local development plan will need to address. Greenbelt is not the rural area. They are at the moment combined in context, and it needs to be separated. What is a brownfield site in the rural area? It is not a bit of area where weeds are now growing over concrete or rubble. That needs to be properly identified. Rural homes, MPF4 wants the rural population to increase, yet the planning guidelines at the moment are blocking most rural homes, rural development. The rural and economic development, the rural area is the only one where they are specifically told that some businesses would not be allowed. It's quite simply says at the moment it has to be something that can only take place, if I've got the wording exactly wrong, but that again needs to be looked at, because it is pointing out that economic development in the rural area has not happened. So these are the main areas that I've seen. The importance of this actually can be shown in your own report. I think you said there was 14, is it zones you called them? 3 of them are in Clydesdale East, which I'm presuming is Ward 3, what you're calling Clydesdale East. So the importance of these rural issues are very important. Regarding looking at the different people who have commented, you haven't communicated with many of the land users. Landowners are not land users, and therefore I think there needs to be an extension to who you are looking at in terms of the people that are actually using the land. Sorry for all these different points. And Robert, it was not the same as the last time. What was it you called me when I rant? So I would hope that these can all be addressed.
No, I totally take on board everything, the comments and the issues and the concerns that you've raised there, Councillor. It's that they're entirely appropriate. I think what I'd mentioned, though, in terms of even my preamble here, is we don't set policy within the evidence report. It's the research that then leads towards policy. So all the issues that you've raised there were actually, we're ahead of the game. And we're actually dealing with them. And we will reflect that in the policies that come through in the LDP. Whether that's to everyone's individual satisfaction, I don't think that will happen, but it will certainly be matters that are reflected through the consultation that goes in the preparation of the plan, how we engage with different communities. In terms of some of the ones that you picked up there, we're already engaging with the Fries and Galloway borders anyway, so we're talking to them as well as the 7 other councils. The call for sites that I'd referred to that will be coming up probably in February, that everyone can put into that, whether they're a landowner, a developer, or they just are a land user. That's their time to engage on that. The council's also got a clear role. We need to engage in that process as well. So this is that's the opportunity that people will have in terms of where do we feel as if new housing should be, where new employment locations should be, where new industry should be, where new infrastructure needs to be. So that call for sites will be a vital part of the process. And that's, again, we'll bring that back to the groups here. The issue around rural housing, that's a key issue that we've got. There's a topic paper that sits behind that. We know we need to grow the rural population. We're driving towards growing the rural population, but it has to be in the appropriate locations. And the idea is to try and grow settlements, to have the housing that's in the right locations that maintains the services that already exist. So that's all part of what will be included in the policy document itself. It's entirely reasonable to raise them at this evidence stage, but we won't have the answers, because if the government accept that our evidence is robust, we can then start developing policy and bringing that back to the planning committee, bringing it back to council as well, and further engagement with as many people as we can. It's trying to get people engaged sometimes is a challenge around it, but we don't give up. We'll keep on going and trying to get as much engagement as we can. Is that okay?
Okay. Alec? Yes. Yeah, okay. Right, thank you. Could I come to Ross Lambie now?
Everyone, thanks. 2 points. The first one I'll go to then is the rural housing supply, since that's what we're just discussing. Most of the developer-built housing supply is really out around Hamilton, East Kilbride, because that's the more commercially viable places for developers to locate. When they do build in the rural area, like Clydesdale, the profit margins are a lot less, and generally they don't. They're not obliged to deliver socially affordable housing. So we do have a lack of that housing type in the rural area. And as Alex said, many councillors believe that MPF4 is actually stymieing building in the countryside. Now, the current state of play is that developers in Clydesdale make developers' contribution in cash effectively to the council, and the council then buys stock currently. We're not really building much stock in the rural area. So it doesn't really alleviate the housing crisis because you're kind of just taking an existing house and changing its offering. So I wonder in the research papers whether we can flush out a way forward for delivering more social affordable housing in the rural areas, which is not taking existing housing, if you like. Second point is, we're targeting about 12,000 new homes in South Lanarkshire in this document. And like I said earlier, developers will want to build around Hamilton, East Kilbride, because that's where the money is, it's where the population centres are. How are we doing forward planning with the education department? Because I look at like Holy Cross High School, which we know is at bursting point. Are we factoring in somehow forward planning to deal with that? I'm conscious that a neighbouring local authority built a high school that cost over £70 million recently, and developers' contributions won't pay for that kind of level. So I'm just curious how across departments this very important document is being dealt with. Thanks.
I'm going to come back to Fraser, but I think there's a valid point in there about, aside from the planning process, a point about investment. That's and how investment facilitates growth, because we were able to use the community growth areas. They were funded, or development was pump prime through the city deal there. But Fraser, do you want to pick up on that?
Yeah, I can try and pick up on a few points. So we work very closely with colleagues in housing in terms of producing the strategic housing investment plan. That then sets the framework for the delivery of the affordable housing programme, and there's provision in that for rural housing, which we would then match through like the planning policies, so that we've got a prohibitive approach towards getting affordable housing across rural communities. So I'm saying, again, we're quite far advanced on that. We've been actually talking to I think it's the Scottish Rural Housing Trust, and there's a South of Scotland Housing Trust as well that's looking at promoting small-scale opportunities for affordable housing within rural communities as well, knowing that it's a different delivery market in the rural area. So we're trying to engage as much as possible with the funders, and then to provide the local development planning framework that would try and encourage development as well. You'd mentioned about the developers having their priorities around Hamilton and East Kilbride. Probably an issue we have with it is there isn't much development taking place from the private sector just now at all. So what we're wanting to make sure is that we don't have a framework that discourages new investment. We need new housing. We need new social housing, we need new private housing as well. We're finding a lot of the house builders just aren't progressing their developments at the pace they are, or the pace that we would like them to. And that's what we're working along with them as well, to try and have a permissive sort of housing environment and housing policy that would cover that as well. Recognising the impact it can have on infrastructure, we work very, very closely with education colleagues, looking at almost on a monthly basis in terms of what's the school capacities, where could be the potential demand, and what we can deliver through either developer contributions, or where there is where actually the constraints on the capacity of schools might be a factor that inhibit housing coming forward. So that's what having a 10-year approach means, that we can identify the right sites where there already is capacity in the infrastructure, and that covers education, it can cover sewage, it can cover roads, it can cover all range of issues. So that's why having this topic-based, infrastructure-led approach towards a local plan means that we aren't bringing forward development that is going to have a big impact on our infrastructure or costs on the council, that we would need to then meet those sort of the capital gaps that might fit in at the back of that.
Okay, thank you very much. Councillor Lambie, did you want to come back on any of that? Or if not, I'll move to David Shearer. David.
Thank you, Chair. As you can see from the contributions that have been made so far, this is a very important document touching on housing, education, infrastructure. It is vital. And when this local development plan comes into being, it will impact how this council goes forward in many, many areas for years to come. So I would ask that there's a members' awareness session for not only members of the planning committee, but members of the entire council, because this plan will impact on every single ward within the council, and we need to know where we're going with this and be aware of all the issues. So I would ask that that awareness session is set up, and not only as one, but continual awareness sessions as we go forward towards adopting this plan. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. I think there have been sessions already on this. No doubt there will be more, but Fraser, do you just want to confirm that?
Yeah, no, I could certainly confirm that. No, I welcome the prominence that you give towards the development plan. Obviously, us as planning authority, we want to see this as a corporate document as well, something that we're all engaged with. We've had, I think, 3 members' engagement sessions, not to date. There was one in September around the evidence report itself that was open to all the members as well. Once the evidence report comes back and we start the call for sites, we'll do a further update to members on that so that you're aware of what the process will be, so that you can inform communities or developers to get in touch with what the process will be as well. So there'll be a whole stage of members' engagement. I think, as I've said before, on some engagement, you'll probably be seeing the planning service coming towards you, but I think we have to do that, and thanks for the opportunity to come and meet with members, because we would like to do that.
Thank you very much. Could I come to Kirsten Robb now?
Thank you. Really interesting document. I spent an afternoon scanning it because that's not enough to read the whole thing. But yeah, it's very holistic. It encourages maybe issues that didn't come to the fore before to be right at the heart of it, like health, like climate change, and proper integrated planning, maybe going back to some of the Newtown principles that we had, but making it even better. So just to thank the team for the different approach that they had this time. I think it was really welcome, and getting all that upfront engagement will hopefully make a more robust, informed plan into the future. So I could see that it was a different approach, and even mentioned the word joyful, that you actually enjoyed it, but I'm sure it was a huge task as well. So it was just to thank the team for that as well. And you've clearly flagged up some areas that need further work as well. So all that is much appreciated, and good luck going forward. Thanks.
Okay. I hope a similarly joyous question from Catherine McLyman.
Thanks, Joe. No, it was just to echo what David said about meetings with the members. I think there'd be some merit in it being a special area committee or something, so it's pertains to our area rather than having to hear about, well, I don't really want to hear about East Kilbride and Hamilton, to be honest, but I would be interested if it was focused in our area. Thanks.
Okay. Well, I think there is merit in an area-based approach, but also a corporate approach. So, right, okay. I think maybe pick up the suggestions of engagement with the area committees as well. Okay. Are there any other questions on the item, on the report? I don't see any, so can we come back to the recommendations? Can we agree the recommendations? Agreed. Thank you very much. We're agreed. I'll come now to item 8, which is on the third sector partnership review, and Tom Little is going to speak to this report. Tom.
I am. Thank you, Chair, and good morning, Committee. This report brings you the outcomes of the Third Sector Partnership Review, and indeed it was the subject of an elected members' seminar on the 20th of October. So it's a large report with several appendices, but the key elements are a draft partnership agreement and a draft third sector grant policy. Both, I have to stress, were co-designed with the local third sector, and both are here for your approval. As a background note at section 3, the review followed the Keep the Beat Alive action plan that was approved by this committee in December 2024. Both that action plan and this review have picked up on what have been the 3 key asks of the local third sector. Those are listed for you at 3.6 in this report. That's page 40 of your papers. The key asks of the sector have been that to recognise their value, that we look at smarter and more sustainable funding practices, and that there should be meaningful engagement between the third sector and decision makers. That was a point that they made both to national and local government. The terms of reference for this review were submitted to the Performance and Review Scrutiny Forum on the 1st of April 2025, and as section 4, which is the purpose of the review notes, that included a shared vision, which was to make South Lanarkshire the best environment for the local third sector to operate in Scotland. Section 5 outlines the review process, and I would argue that this shows that this was a really genuine partnership piece of work, including how those terms of reference that I just made reference to were agreed jointly by the Council and by the sector. And you'll note the key role played throughout this by Vaslan as the local TSI. And indeed, Vaslan co-designed, co-hosted and co-facilitated a number of workshops to help this process and make sure it was as inclusive as possible. So those workshops are listed at 5.7 in your report, and I can tell you that more than 110 local organisations took part in those 3 workshops, while many more engaged in post-workshop surveys, which were followed up with each one. So following these workshops, the Third Sector Partnership Agreement and the Third Sector Grant Policy were drafted, again, council officers working with VASLAN and others from the third sector. And then the documents were opened up for 2 weeks of wider consultation with the third sector at large. The next 2 sections in the report pick up on those 2 key draft documents that I mentioned. So first is at section 6, and that's a partnership agreement. It's attached to this report as Appendix 2. And it establishes a strategic partnership between the council and local third sector organisations with the aim to collaborate on delivering services for local people and our communities. It sets out principles and behaviours and also the roles and responsibilities of all parties involved. And of those, I bring your attention to 6.8 in your report, because it makes the point that within the council itself, our resources and services will need to review and make their own recommendations for how and when they will increase strategic engagement with the third sector. I would summarise the partnership agreement by saying that the key themes that appear throughout it are transparency, accountability, mutual respect and a commitment to better collaborative working. Moving on to section 7, it summarises the draft grant policy, which again is attached to the report, this time was Appendix 3. And on the same theme as the partnership agreement, it aims to create a fair, open and transparent set of consistent third sector grant processes for all council-funded third sector grant activity. It proposes that the quite wide range of council grants should be organised under 3 banners, and these are outlined for you at 7.6 in the report. That's page 43 of your papers. And those 3 banners are community small grants of up to £1,000, community medium grants from that limit up to £19,999, and the larger third sector investment grants of £20,000 and above. In addition, the policy lays out how information on all council-funded grants will be consolidated in one place on our council website, creating a kind of one-stop shop for the sector and all who are interested in its work. And it will also create a fully transparent public grant register as part of that work as well. Now, usually grants will be open to applications from all eligible groups, though direct awards will be able to be made in circumstances as outlined at 7.11 in this report, page 44 of your papers. A final, but I think important point on section 7, outlined at 7.13 in your report. The partnership agreement proposes that we create a new thing, an annual third sector report that is brought before this committee. And I think the first one would probably be in June 27, if this is all approved. And that report will outline the delivery of partnership agreement and the breakdown of grant funding that is awarded under the new policy and across those 3 banners. The aim here, obviously, is to give elected members full sight of how we're delivering on these promises made in collaboration with the sector. Moving on to section 8, it outlines how the proposed grant policy would be implemented for the start of the next financial year, 26-27, and a list of grants that would be available is included as Appendix 4 to this report. Now, the arrangements for 26-27 will implement a saving that was agreed as part of the budget setting process in 2023-24, in particular relating to what's known as the Voluntary Organisations Fund. Now, that saving was deferred, and most recently so that it could be concluded as part of this review. Now, as I mentioned before, one of the 3 categories of grant that's proposed under the new policy is a new community medium grants, and these will be administered through the community engagement team, and their recommendations for grant awards will be made to the Finance and Corporate Resources Committee. Again, that's a new level of scrutiny we're proposing. Now, due to underspends, a one-off fund will be available through that fund next year in 26-27 of about £200,000, and all eligible organisations will be able to bid into that fund. Now, that's an open process, and it meets one of the key requests that came from the sector as part of this review, that funds were available to be bid to by all. Finally, paragraphs 8.9 and 8.10 in this report, that's page 45 in your papers. I hope they make it clear that this isn't a one-off piece of collaboration, that we will continue to work with VASLAN and with the wider local third sector to maximise the work that they can undertake for us and for our communities in line with the outcomes that we lay out in our council plan. So that was a quick summary of what I have to say has been a very complex piece of work over the best part of a year. And I think it's worth acknowledging the very hard work involved, not just of council officers, but our friends and colleagues in the third sector and especially VASLAN. So with that, I'd like to take you to the recommendations if I can, page 39 of your papers, and they are that the draft third sector partnership agreement be approved, that the draft third sector grant policy be approved, and that an implementation plan that is in Appendix 5 also be approved, and that you note the proposed treatment for the new community medium grants in the coming financial year. Thanks.
Okay, thank you very much, Tom, for that report. And I would just echo my thanks to everybody who's been involved in this process, not just from the council side, but also amongst our partners in the third sector. I think there have been a coming together of two objectives. One is that the council has to understand where we are issuing grant, why we do it, who do we give money to and why do we do it, what is the basis for doing it. And this, when it comes to grant policy, gives us some clarity if this is adopted, but also the work that the third sector themselves were campaigning for and pressing for through their lobbying of us in the motion that we agreed as a council that has led to this process as well. So I think there's two imperatives that have actually led to some real collaboration in the co-production of this report, and it's welcome progress. Now, are there any questions? I can see I've got 3 or 4, so could I come to Ross Clark in the first instance? Ross.
Thank you, Chair, and thank you very much to Tom for the report. We would like to welcome this and also thank everyone who has played a part in putting this together and bringing multiple organisations together, because it is really, really important that this is a partnership with the third sector, that we are understanding each other's roles and that we're truly valuing the work that the third sector does. And it needs to be that continuous engagement. So it's good to see Tom specifically in the paper specifically mentioning this isn't just kind of a one-hit process. This is something that we're going to keep up that engagement for the foreseeable future and have that, as I said, that proper partnership. Councillor Chalmers and I had attended the VASLAN AGM, and some of our group had recently met with VASLAN. And while this is welcome, it's really good to see that focus on that engagement. There is obviously still concerns that remain, one of the big ones being financial sustainability of volunteer and third sector organisations. I know that's touched upon in the report, but I think to make more of a comment, it's something that we should be continually mindful of in the financial pressures of serious financial concerns some organisations do have, and should always be looking to see what we can do to support these funding opportunities, these funding practices and so on, because these are the pressures which they are experiencing, and something for officers to be mindful of, but mainly us as decision makers when it comes to budget times, when we're engaging with the Scottish Government, the UK Government and the likes of COSLA. So more of a comment and a question and something which should continue to be at the top of our minds.
Okay, thank you very much. Can I come to Margaret Walker?
Thank you, Chair. You made most of my points. I would also like to welcome this report and acknowledge all the work that's went into it is very, very difficult in terms of bringing that wide group of organisations together, and also the work that VASLAN has done. I think to work collaboratively it will maximise their impact and it will maximise our ability to understand what people's goals and objectives are and how to best achieve them, particularly without any sort of duplication and working to people's strengths and working to that organisation's strength to the benefit of the service user. I think, yes, the funding issue particularly provides a situation where we really have to do that, particularly given the difficulties that the third sector is currently under and the funding issues that they're facing just now. So I think that the partnership agreement can only help us navigate our way through that to make sure that we are achieving the best for the service user. And I would like to acknowledge that and welcome the paper and hope that we can go ahead and that the partnership will continue to flourish, and that there will come a time when the third sector is better funded than it is at the moment, and that hopefully can continue to play the role that it does, which is crucial across a whole range of different care groups, young people, older people, people with disabilities, all of it. Their role is absolutely crucial, and I think the partnership will help to make sure that that continues. Thank you.
Thank you very much. And could I come now to Robert Brown?
Yes, thanks very much, Chair. Can I also welcome the report and the work that's been put into it, which I think is very, very considerable. There's a lot of good things in the report, amongst which are the public register of grants and the new processes and all that kind of thing. The point's been made about financial sustainability by Ross Clark, who was entirely right in that connection. And I think the issues that I've got points to make about, I think, really are transition, because amongst the other things involved in this are the existing bodies who receive certain funding at the moment, and the CABs are the ones that stick to, in my mind, as a former chair of Rotherham Cambuslang CAB some years ago. I don't want to make a particular thing about that, but I do want to make the point, if I may, that at a time of rising requirements for advice services, rising numbers of people resorting to CAB services and things like that, and against the background of anti-poverty strategies that this council is committed to, I think we've got to be very careful about the grant levels we get out of this. There's a budget implication from what happened last year and previous years on this as well. It's much, much easier to do these things and make them, if you like, happen in a sustainable way against a background of a rising budget. And therefore, I think the ideas that have been looked at by the review with regard to procurement and the 1% business and all of that, I think are worth looking at, and also our own budget processes, because I do think we've actually got to arrive at a point where the sustainability is there going forward as far as we can make it so. It's important to look at this on a locality basis too, and I'm pleased to see the references to locality plans, but as you touched on in an earlier report, there's a corporate element to this as well as the locality issue too, and I hope there'll be a role for the area committees on the locality area of the thing as well. Finally, just to make the point, if I may, on the medium funding. The medium funding pot has been rather put together for current purposes from bits and pieces, so to speak. We've got, I think, to look at that going forward as to where the medium funding pot will come from in the future, because underspends are not a way of dealing with that in the long term. And again, it's this financial sustainability point which we have to look at. So I do hope in the context of the budget that all parties on a reasonably consensual basis will look at what's required here and see what we can do in terms of support for the voluntary sector, which at the end of the day does actually fill in a lot of gaps, provide an awful lot of services which wouldn't otherwise happen, and do things which happen in a more flexible way than council and public services are sometimes able to do. Thanks, Chair. Comment rather than question, obviously.
Okay, thank you. And I suppose my final comment would just be to draw everybody's attention to 8.10 in the report. I think this has been a substantial piece of work, but this is not the end of it. And I think if I could just, I mean, this does mention, but not that we can look at what we can do through public procurement, but not exclusively the additional funding opportunities that come through procurement. And I think there is an obvious overlap with our community wealth building work to build that ecosystem that's conducive to a stronger third sector, but also in a wider sense, a plurality of ownership models in the social economy. So I think there's a lot to build on from here. Can I draw us back to the recommendations in the report and can I ask us to agree the recommendations?
Agreed.
We're agreed. Thank you very much. Come now to item 9, which is on the revenue budget paper and savings proposals. Jackie.
Thank you, Chair. This paper reflects information that was shared with members at the briefing session last week. I'll take you through the main highlights of it. At the background section on page 69, a reminder of the position that I reported to the Executive Committee in June around our budget gap over the next 2 years. We highlighted a budget gap of £24.2 million at that point that we expected to increase due to the impending pay award at that point in time. So this paper will give an update on key budget areas over the next 2 years and some solutions that we've identified, and also introduce the savings that we have presented for consideration by members going forward in the budget process, and also council tax. So section 4 picks up the update on some key budget areas. So since the last budget report that I mentioned in June, we have had a pay award agreed for our staff members except for teachers, and we have had information obviously updated in relation to inflation forecasts and in relation to council tax income. So the first of those in relation to pay award, as I mentioned, we have agreed a pay award now for local government staff for the current financial year and next year, but not for teachers. However, on the assumptions that we are continuing to make, our budget gap has increased from that position that I reported in June, from the £24.2 million to £40.6 million to include the impact of that pay award. We also have looked at inflation forecasts where they will affect some of our key contracts, and that will increase our budget gap into 26-27 by £700,000. However, that's offset by what we're now seeing in terms of the number of properties that we're collecting council tax income from. So we are expecting that we should see an estimated £700,000 more in council tax next year, and that will offset the impact of inflation. We have some solutions at section 5 that are detailed. Firstly, around loan charges, we expect a significant capital receipt that can be used to reduce the level of borrowing that the council takes. That will result in a recurring revenue saving to our loan charges budget of £1.5 million. So that in turn will reduce the budget gap that I've presented. We also have reviewed our accounting transactions around service concessions. You may remember that we've introduced that as a way of balancing and managing our savings requirements over the coming years. We are now expecting to see that accounting transaction hit earlier in terms of our ability to manage our savings targets. So that will now benefit our 26-27 year, and that will reduce the budget gap in that year. And then a small adjustment in relation to the requisitions that the council pays over to the Lanarkshire Valuation Joint Board. So matching their budget requirements will have less to contribute in 26-27. However, we have to reinstate some of that into 27-28. So the net position taken into account those areas that I've mentioned is detailed at the bottom of page 71 in table 1. So we're now seeing that over the next 2 financial years, we have a budget gap of just over £36.3 million. And specifically for 26-27, which is the year that we will require to set a budget for by February, we have a budget gap of £14.1 million. At the top of page 72, at section 6.2, I do mention the fact that there is obviously a risk to the figures that I'm presenting to you. That's because we haven't yet seen the UK or the Scottish budget announcements for 26-27. Therefore, we don't have details of our specific grant settlement for next financial year. We expect to get that on the 13th of January, and obviously it will keep members updated from that point in relation to what that settlement tells us for our position. Section 7 of the report covers the proposed package of savings that we're presenting for members' consideration up to the point where we set the budget. Appendix 1 provides the full details of those savings, and 7.2 in Table 2 summarises that for members. We have savings totalling £8.3 million. That includes management and operational savings of £3.7 million, along with resource savings proposals of £4.6 million. If we compare that to the budget gap that I mentioned a second ago of £14.1 million, that leaves a shortfall of £5.8 million. But at this point in time of reporting, we haven't included any assumptions around increases in council tax, and that's covered in section 8 of the report. I make a point at 8.1 just to remind members that we have the lowest council tax in Scotland and South Lanarkshire. Last year, we increased our council tax by 6%. The average increase in Scotland last year was 9.57%. We are currently 12% below the Scottish average. And for illustration, 8.2, I've advised that if there was a decision to increase to the council's Scottish average council tax level, that would see perhaps over time an increase in spending power of £20 million per annum. I've also included at table 3 illustrations of what different percentage increases in council tax could contribute towards the budget gap. And that right-hand column of the table shows how much each of those percentage illustrations would reduce the budget gap by. So section 9 of the report summarises the information that I've covered, but also points to next steps. And the timeline at section 9.4 points to our budget consultation exercise, which I'll cover in a second. That date I expect to see our settlement, our grant settlement received being the 13th of January. And then we would look to be setting a budget for the next financial year by the 25th of February. So I mentioned budget consultation. I've gone into a little bit more detail at section 9.5. We intend to start the consultation process with the public following this meeting, and we'll build on the approach that we've taken in previous years that has been successful in getting good responses back from members of the public in relation to our proposals around the budget. We'll obviously advise members of the outcome of that consultation exercise prior to decisions having to be taken on the budget. Section 10 of the report picks up some information around one-off funding, particularly the package extended producer responsibility funding that I mentioned earlier. So as I mentioned earlier, at the Executive Committee in August, it was proposed that the underspend that we'll see this year of £7.1 million could be transferred to reserves, and it could be used to support the budget strategy, particularly around the additional costs in relation to pay. An amendment was put forward also at that point in time. But decision was taken to carry forward consideration of this and to write to the Scottish Government around the funding. Just to continue the option that was put on the table back in August, using one-off monies can help on a temporary basis manage the need to make savings over a period of time. And the illustration at table 5 of the report shows that using, for example, £7 million of funding in 27-28 can reduce the need for savings in that year, and that's illustrated there for you on page 75. If some of that £7 million is used for other things, then the impact of the illustration at table 5 is that the level of savings required would change. Appendix 2 within the report shows how one-off funding can be used over the longer term to manage the Council's budget strategy, and that uses at the moment the officers' proposals around the £7 million in 27-28. If there is less to use in that year, that would have to be balanced either by further savings, an increase in council tax, or using reserves in order to meet the budget gap in that year. Picking up again at 10.8 is the point I was making earlier in the earlier report around teacher numbers and reduced class contact time. Essentially, that depending on any funding that's available for reducing class contact time, that may impact on the level of savings that the council has to make. Section 11 of the report on reinstatement simply reports for members the use of one-off funding that we have within our budget assumptions. These have all been reported previously and agreed by members, and they're all built into the budget gaps that I've talked about earlier. And employee implications for the package of savings proposed is detailed at section 12. Again, as has been the case in recent years, if there are employees affected by savings, we will support them through reviewing vacant posts, voluntary redeployment, and where appropriate, our council's redeployment policies. Picking up just in other implications, at section 15, we do cover the processes that are also ongoing around the Integrated Joint Board and the South Lanarkshire Leisure and Culture budgets. They obviously have their own budget processes. However, we do reference within that section a couple of items that you'll see in the savings that touch on those particular areas. And finally, at section 16, we have provided a link to the integrated impact assessments for the savings that we have presented. As we go through the consultation process, obviously those will be updated as appropriate before final decisions are taken by members. So if I take you back to the recommendations in section 2, we are asking that the update on key budget items are noted, that the permanent budget solutions in relation to loan charges, service concessions and the valuation joint board requisitions be approved, that the revised two-year budget gap across 26-27 and 27-28 of that £36.3 million be noted, that the savings included in Appendix 1 be considered, and that in relation to the use of the one-off funding to manage the budget gap across the next 2 years, which is covered in section 10, then the use of £7 million be utilised in 27-28 be approved, and that the risk areas that I mentioned also are noted. Thank you, Chair.
Okay, thank you very much. I'm going to ask if there are any questions. If you could please indicate now. I also want to raise an issue myself. So it would be my intention to move the recommendations in the report with one amendment, which I believe has been circulated, and it seeks to resolve this issue that has been kind of held in abeyance since the last time we addressed the issue of the extended producer responsibility scheme. So you will know about the uncertainty that there has been around that issue. You will know there were the recommendations that have been made previously, so that the officers of the council recommended that £7 million or thereabouts should be transferred to deal with the budget strategy, and there was another proposal which we did not reject but chose to suggest that we should revisit this, that came forward at a previous meeting around allocating about 2.1 million of that funding to retain that within the community and enterprise budget for a range of initiatives related to waste. Now, since then, there have been a few developments. There hasn't necessarily been an enormous amount of clarity, but could I perhaps draw your attention to a previous report, our initial report on the revenue budget monitoring paper 4.8 and 4.9 of that report dealt with the response that we received from the Cabinet Secretary, the relevant Cabinet Secretary in the Scottish Government, which advised us that, well, similar to the position that was communicated by our officials, that, well, this funding is here just now for this year's budget and is being negotiated. It is the Scottish Government's intention. This was not clear to all councillors, as I recall at that meeting. It is the Scottish Government's intention to remove that funding from our recurring settlement. Now, since then, I believe there have been some further exchanges of correspondence that suggest there are still mixed messages around this, and I don't think that is particularly helpful. And so we're in a place where I don't think we've got the clarity that we really would want, but there is also an expectation that there is a pressure clearly on our waste services, and I think there is a desire to invest with them. Now, I appreciate the work that Kirsten Robb did back in August, where she brought forward an amendment and also engaged with our service on it. I'm going to put forward a set of proposals which I think reflect some of that work and some of our own ideas as an administration, which are set out in an amendment. The first section of that relates to investing in our vehicles, where we know there is a need to build resilience into the system to help the service reduce downtime. And the second part of that proposal is to invest in additional perspex-sided bins. We know from the pilot in Spring Hall that that has been very successful in improving recycling rates in flatted and tenemental accommodation. We know there has been an increase, there has been a demand to the pilot for garden composters, and I'm proposing that we make additional investment in that, but also that we accompany that with maybe some more public information and engagement work. Because maybe the best way of allocating those home composters has not been simply to release that information online. Maybe there's some engagement we need to do at community level with our networks to get them to the people that need them most. I'm proposing that, if you recall at the budget this year, £350,000 was set aside to deal with or to help address some waste and fly tipping issues. That is being used to, for example, invest in cameras and put in some additional staffing resource. I'm proposing that we double that additional investment this year and build ourselves a pot of £700,000 to deal to help us address waste and fly tipping. I'm also proposing there's £200,000 to help roll out the freestanding hooded bins and £300,000 to roll out more of these solar compacting smart bins that we have trialled in South Lanarkshire, that a number of other authorities use and would appear to make the biggest difference in those high footfall areas. So that's investment that totals £2.5 million. The remaining £4.5 million, I think, should go into the budget strategy, and I think it is important to note that where we are currently suggesting that be used in the budget strategy is not for this coming financial year, but for the financial year that follows. And I think that is significant because we do not want to find we're in a place where we've necessarily exhausted all of this money, and then there is a sting in the tail that comes when messaging reaches us from government around how they expect that funding to be used. So I appreciate the work that's been done. I think we've done the right thing, taking our time to work through some of these issues. I wish we had some more clarity. I'm maybe just going to ask Paul Manning about some correspondence that's come in from PAC UK that appears to take us in a different road from the response from the Cabinet Secretary, because I'm a bit concerned that we have Scottish and UK governments saying different things, but we do have some clarity from the Scottish Government that their intention is that this would not be recurring funding, and that's obviously a factor in us deciding how we choose to allocate this money, as you'll recall from previous meetings. So if I know Councillor Brown and Councillor Convery are familiar with those proposals. I'd propose that as an amendment to the existing paper. And Councillor Convery's happy to second it. I've got a number of people who want to speak. Before I do, I'm just want to come to Paul Manning on that point around where we got to with clarity around this funding, and it doesn't appear to be a brilliant place. But Paul.
Okay, what I'll maybe do, Chair, just with your indulgence, right? The piece of correspondence that Councillor Fagan's referring to is an email and a letter that came in last night from DEFRA with the award for 2026-27. So this came in late last night, just at 6 o'clock. In terms of the amount for 26-27, there's a letter that accompanies the email. It gives a figure. It's not dissimilar to the figure that we had for 2025-26. It's at £7.9 million. A point I would need to make is it comes with the same caveats as the letter that we got last year, which was that this might change, and then it did, right? So that's a first position that we're being given in November. Probably a point that I would make is that in terms of this notice of the figure for next year, there is an accompanying letter, there's an accompanying email. And one of the things that's in the email is that it says, we are confident that local authorities are committed to these reforms and view EPR for packaging as an opportunity to improve the services offered to citizens and to support a circular economy for packaging. So in terms of that wording, and I think that's continued in the wording in the letter as well, the suggestion there, the inference for me is that that's additional funding into the system, which local authorities are intended to welcome and take that opportunity to improve services. That, I think, and this is where I'll maybe just turn to Jackie for confirmation in terms of the discussion between Directors of Finance and the Scottish Government, I think that's at odds with the dialogue that we're having as Scottish councils with the Scottish Government, where the suggestion is that an amount of money equivalent to that is likely to be drawn back from our settlement when that process is gone through in December. So I'll maybe just bring in Jackie to clarify that first hand.
Yeah, thanks, Paul. I would agree that there is still a level of uncertainty for us going forward. The letter that we received back from the Scottish Government did state that it's intended that the funding will in future years replace equivalent funding in the local government settlement. And as I mentioned earlier, it said that decisions for 26-27 and beyond will be a matter for the Scottish Budget and Spending Review, and that the budget engagement planned between the Scottish Government and COSLA is the appropriate forum for discussions on this. So very much it is an area where we are looking to get levels of clarity around whether our settlement will be impacted to remove the equivalent level of funding that we receive to match the external funding that we'll get from DEFRA. So that's the position that we were advised in October, at the start of October, from the Scottish Government.
Okay. Thank you very much for that. And I should say, as part of the amendment that I'm putting forward, I am also proposing that the committee instructs that a response go to the Scottish Government, reiterating the position already agreed by local government and by COSLA, that there should be no downward reduction in the local government settlement in relation to this EPR funding. Okay. There are a number of people who want to speak, and I'm going to come to everybody. And I know there are there's amendment that's circulated, but can I come in the first instance to Ross Clark?
Thank you, Chair. I'll just ask for a short recess so we can discuss the amendments.
Okay, I'll happy to do that because I think we're probably due a recess anyway, but before I do that, could I maybe just see if there are any, can I run through other points in case people have questions on the content, and it might actually assist people with their recess. So can I come to Robert Brown? Okay, can I come to Norman Ray?
It's not a question so much as a comment, so I don't know if you want to take that now. Okay, well, yeah, I'm very supportive of the amendment, and particularly in relation to future years and that question of whether the grant from the government is reduced by the equivalent amount. Members will remember that about a year ago, just slightly less than a year ago, the council passed a motion on this topic, in which it said that the EPR principle obviously requires that producer payments go entirely to the councils dealing with waste. They cannot be a source of general revenue for the Scottish, UK, Welsh or Northern Irish governments. Accordingly, South Lanarkshire Council is concerned by suggestions the Scottish Government may not pass on the full payments allocated by the scheme administrator to local authorities within Scotland. Now, if one was being pedantic, one would say the money is coming straight to councils, but of course the equivalent amount may be taken away, so the effect is the same of not receiving that money, that additional money at all. And as the amendment, I think, points out, and also as we see in terms of the use for this year's money, and here I suppose I speak particularly with my hat of the chair of the Climate Change and Sustainability Committee. This money can be used and should be used, I would argue, to enhance and improve our handling of waste and making that more sustainable. But obviously, if that grant is reduced by the equivalent amount, then we'll simply be using it for the existing spending on that, and we won't be able to do any additional work, and I don't think that's acceptable. So yes, to conclude, I suppose, is that I'm very supportive of the amendment, and that I think it really isn't acceptable for the Scottish Government to claw back that money that councils should be getting. Yet again, councils seem to be losing out in that regard. Thank you.
Okay. Thank you very much. And can I come to Kirsten Robb?
Thank you. Appreciate the recess opportunity as well to discuss this. I was going to propose an amendment, not to your amendment because I didn't know it was happening, but maybe we can find, after recess, we can find a way to come together on it. So I don't know if you want to see it beforehand, or we might want to change it now we've seen this as well.
I'm content for it to be circulated if you are, if it helps with discussion, it helps other groups. And I think what I would suggest is that we maybe come back here. I'm conscious that we'll probably do a comfort break as well at 12:10 if people are content with that, and that gives us just over 15 minutes for a comfort break and to deal with the issue of the amendment. Okay? Apologies to anyone else who has other meetings today. Okay. And yeah, so we can circulate that, and we will come back here at 12:10. make a start just now. A consensus appears to have emerged, but I'm going to just come to Councillor Robb, if that's all right, just to articulate the proposal that she was making, which I believe we can accommodate with a slight change to the administration amendment. We can accommodate following discussions during the recess. So, could I come to Councillor Robb?
Thanks very much, and thanks for the engagement as well, and to officers for their advice too. It's fairly similar to the one we proposed in August, but we welcome this amendment. It's all good stuff, and addresses, as some of you will see from the litter strategy coming to Climate Committee next week, more actions needed in this area, despite the heroic efforts of staff to help. So what I'm proposing is, or what we've discussed there with Joe, is to ensure that the key areas that we're looking for in our amendment are highlighted in Joe's amendment there. So particularly including the pilot test of change. We want to prevent litter in the long run. So, and we wanted to respond to the Youth Forum's request to Community Planning Partnership to work on a project with that. So I think that'll be interesting and useful to see wider implications when the report comes out. So that is, I think, Joe, yourself said that you could accommodate this within waste and fly tipping. Was that right? Section of your table there. The comms, we were particularly keen on helping people understand where what the alternatives were to disposal or free uplift, paid for uplift, so that people could reuse, recycle more as well. And I think you said you could also accommodate that in waste and fly tipping section of the table. The other thing that came out of discussions were to engage with litter picking groups. From the stats, it seems that community litter picking is down or not as reported as much. So we were keen that we engage with our fantastic litter picking groups. Apologies, transparency statement. I am a volunteer with a litter picking group, but I think useful insight rather than a conflict here. So yeah, to engage with them to look at outward-facing promotion and support for community groups doing more and individuals doing litter picking. And I think that was it, but please let me know if I've missed anything off there.
Okay, I will, just to confirm, so there is a proposal here that is for 350,000 of additional investment in waste and fly tipping. Now that's coming on top of the 350,000 already allocated. So together that's given us a pot of £700,000. So it's a substantial chunk of money. A large amount of that is already working its way through the system. The description that I've attached to that specifically says additional staff and equipment. I'm proposing that we come to something vaguer here to say interventions, including engagement and awareness. And what I would like to do, if the committee are content, is see that we then have built into that budget the space in which we can accommodate some of those requests from Councillor Robb. And I think a valid point has been made about the next steps that we make in relation to litter picking. The only other things, two points just about the discussions. I'll bring in Councillor Brown and Councillor Clark in just a second. But believe it or not, the colour of the bins has come up in terms of bin replacement. I'll maybe bring in David Booth to talk about that, but these are to be much more visible bins, and we are looking to align certainly the smart bins, but I think also the other bins that are being deployed with their with that point around visibility and their specific branding as well. And in terms of where fly tipping and littering is an issue, so I think Councillor Clark was quite, I'll bring him in a second, but he was quite keen to highlight town and village centres, but not to the exclusion or detriment of other areas where we know we've got a problem, like the rural area, and also where we have a lot of high density housing, which is probably where a lot of councillors get the most complaints about fly tipping. Can I come to Councillor Brown and then Councillor Clark? Councillor Brown.
Yes, thanks very much, Chair. I just want to say a few words of support on this, and also not to lose track of the business of the future years funding as well, because that's really quite important, as yourself and Councillor Ray, amongst others, have made mention. And it's important really because this is a new pot of money. We don't get many of these in local government, do we? It's a new pot of money. it's designed to do certain specific things, and it is collected from people with certain purposes in the waste sphere in mind. So it's extremely important, I think, that that money is made available in the future for additionality, which will help us to do that. And as Norman Ray pointed out earlier, this is something the Council has taken a strong view on, as has COSLA, over some particular period of time. I'd like to say one or two things, if I may, as Chair of Communities Enterprise, on the actual proposals in the amendment, because there is behind this quite a significant issue of resilience. You know, we've salami chopped over the years under financial pressures quite a lot of the services and the machines and the staff and all that support the things we want to do. And because of the focus on education and on social work, Community Enterprise has taken the bulk of that kind of cutback. And what this does really is put a bit more resilience into the system, a few more vehicles, a bit more staffing support, that kind of thing to deal with a situation where people expect their bins to be collected on time. They expect there to be a reasonable street collection, street waste collection system as well, and they expect the whole system to work in a way which is reasonably effective. As to be fair, it largely has done in my time on South Lanarkshire Council. The garden composters, I think, are an important element. I think that we've had 2 tranches of this already. They were sold out, so to speak, at a very early stage of the matter, and this provides a few more composters. It's important, I think, there's the information that goes with this, because I think we've heard reports of some people that have phoned up to ask when their compost bin is going to be uplifted. So we've got to actually watch that kind of problem, I think, in going forward on it. I'm particularly interested myself in the changes that we're making in the bin structures, because the Perspex bins have been piloted, as Joe mentioned, in Spring Hall in my ward, have been very, very successful in that connection, far more than I thought personally that they would be. And they've been successful in terms of greatly reducing the amount of contamination that has been available in the recycling bit, and making sure that this actually adds to the Council's ability to recycle as much as possible in that connection. Sort of linked to that is the issue of the freestanding and the smart bins. The freestanding bins have been an issue we've been moving on for a little while to try and replace the kind of smaller things that the birds get at with the larger freestanding bins, which have got greater capacity and have got lids on them and all that. They work much more satisfactorily in that connection. And this provides a boost to that particular framework, which will allow us to go forward much more speedily on that particular matter. And then the last one, which is additional, I think, to what we've talked about before, is the smart bins. Now, you may recall these were piloted in Stuartfield Lock, James Hamilton Heritage Centre, periodically. These, I understand, are sort of more updated ones, learning on some of the experiences there, but they are very, very effective, and they are very well worthwhile having a go with, albeit a bit more expensive than the other ones. So I'm very keen to see this going forward. It adds together these miscellaneous bits of proposals to quite a substantial waste collection improvement, new generation of waste collection things as well, and I'm glad there's been a consensus around the sort of things that go in support of that. Thanks very much, Chair.
Okay, thank you very much. And can I come to Ross Clark?
Thank you, Chair. I think we would be happy with these points being, or receiving assurance that these points are being included. I think, I know David, you said David would come in on the bins, but as long as we, that point around the brightly coloured street bins can be included within the amendment that's been put forward. I think in relation to communication, if that can be picked up by the wording you suggested around engagement and awareness, then we would be happy with that. I think, though, specifically we would look for some wording that mentions the lunchtime litter prevention pilot to ensure that the asks of the Sustainability Youth Forum are taken forward. I think we would look for specific wording around that, and we're obviously happy with the bit about town centres to be included.
Okay. David, could I bring you in just now to talk us through what bin replacement looks like, literally?
Okay, thanks very much, Chair, and thank you for the contributions towards this. So I think it's clear here there's been a kind of consensus around about the both amendments, and what I would be doing is taking back to the service and coming up with a kind of programme of work and spend that underpins and honours these both these amendments. In terms of that specific issue around about the colour of the bins, there is data now that says that if you have brightly coloured bins, then people bizarrely are more likely to put their litter in it rather than just the standard sort of kind of grey or black bins that you see about the place. So what we will do is we'll incorporate it as we move forward in terms of these bins. It may not be appropriate to have them in every single place as Bright Club, but those places where we think there's going to be an impact on our ability, we'll definitely do that around about our towns with the solar bins, the high footfall areas, and rolling out the standing hooded bins as well. So we'll make sure we do that, and we'll build in as well the comments around about the youth forum and the connecting with youth forum and working with them as well. So I'm confident that in terms of the amount of money that's been allocated here, if it's £2.5 million, we can make that work.
Right, well, thank you very much. So can we ensure that's reflected in the minute of the meeting? And that being the case, can I ask people to agree the motion, I will move the motion as amended, and are people minded to agree that?
I'll second.
Now, do I need a formal seconder
And we're
for the
agreed.
purposes of the minutes, because it's not what's in the papers? If everyone's agreed, we don't need to do that, as long as both seconders also agree. So I'm looking around the room and I think everybody has indicated they agree. We're agreed.
Yep.
Brilliant. Okay, thank you very much. That brings us to item 10, which is on our community plan. Okay, and I don't have my note in front of me now because I'm drowning in paper, but I'm going to take a guess that it's Tom Little that's going to speak to that. It's not, it's Jen, sorry. Well, it is Tom. It is Tom. I was right. Tom, over to you.
You're stuck with me, Chair. Sorry, Jen had to go, so I'll pick up this one. So the purpose of this report is to advise the committee on progress made against outcomes within the community plan, which runs till 2032, as it stood at the end of March of this year. As usual, with our performance reports, full detail of that is in Appendix 1. This report also brings you an update on the annual outcomes improvement report for 24-25, and that's detailed as Appendix 2. So progress to date is summarised in the table at 4.4, which is in your papers at 102. And you'll see that of the 76 measures that are being measured against the community plan, 71 are showing it blue or green, 2 at red and 3 at amber. Now, from 4.7 onwards, the report takes a closer look at the 3 amber measures and the 2 red measures, with some explanatory commentary and, where appropriate, partner actions to improve the measure. I won't go into those in detail, but you'll see that there is a couple come up on business support, a couple on homelessness, and 1 on hospital discharge. If I can take you forward to page 106 in your papers. The rest of the report then breaks down some of these numbers over priority themes, and you'll see there are some key achievements that have been achieved, to use a better word, in that period. Taking you forward again to page 113 in your papers, that's where you get details of the content of that Appendix 2, the Annual Outcomes Improvement Report. Happy to take any questions if I can answer them. If I can't, I'll get Jen to come back.
Okay, thank you. Can I ask if there are any questions on this report? I'm not seeing any. The themes in it are familiar and have been reported through a number of committees. But if there are, this is just for noting, so if there are no questions, I'll note the report and move to the next item. And this is a report from the Chief Social Work Officer. It's an annual report for 24-25. And for the last time, I'm going to ask Liam Purdy to speak to that item. Liam.
Yep. Thank you very much, Chair, and good afternoon, committee. This is the report that you'll be familiar with. It's the Annual Chief Social Work Officer report for 2024-2025. Section 3 just gives a background to the report that the Chief Social Work Officer needs to produce an annual report for the Chief Social Work Advisor for the Scottish Government. That report was submitted on the 31st of October, just last week, so we've met the timescales for that. You'll see in Section 4 that the report is a formal template. It's split into 5 sections. As well as introduction, there's 5 sections that then go on to discuss governance, service quality and performance, resources, workforce and looking ahead. Throughout section 4, you'll see that we've given examples of at 4.3, the governance and accountability, and that's highlighted within the report as well at Appendix 1. In terms of section 2, and equality and performance, we've given examples of children, adult and justice services, and we've highlighted that with examples throughout the report of what we would see as good practice and good things to share. We've given examples of that of the Social Care Forum that we're linked in within South Lanarkshire, which gets good engagement with the public and people that use our services. We've also given an example as well of the care opinion, and we are particularly proud of the fact that we're getting really good justice, community justice feedback from that as well. We're one of the first in Scotland to do that. In section 3 within resources, we identify that we are continuing to meet all our statutory requirements within the council. And despite the challenges we've got, the financial challenges, the savings and just the cost of living crisis, we're managing to meet all the statutory requirements. But what we are seeing is an increasing trend in adult support and protection and child protection activity. You'll see at the appendix within that as well that we're averaging 32 adult support and protection investigations per week and 14 child protection investigations per week. That's a lot of activity and a lot of demand, but we're managing to maintain that throughout. Section 4, with regards to the workforce, you'll see that we've got just under 3,000 staff that are employed within social work resources. Through the workforce plan, the social work resource plan for 25-27, we identified 5 key main areas that we wanted to look at with the workforce, and that's highlighted at 4.6.2. What I'm pleased to report is that we've complied with all the regulatory requirements of a registered workforce, and those that are not registered, that are employed, actually then get training immediately within that. We've given examples of leadership programmes, and we're looking how we can upskill staff with new technology, because that seems to be the future, so we're wanting to make sure that we can future-proof our staff to be aware of that. One of the big things we've highlighted in the report as well is that we undertook a redesign of localities last year. And we're pleased to report that in terms of recruitment and retention, we're managing to maintain social workers in those localities, which was a problem for us in previous years. Section 5 is the horizon scan and looking at the challenges coming in the future, and they're highlighted as well at 4.7 within the report. I said the report's attached as an appendix. You'll see within the appendix as well that we've got hyperlinks to things like the council plan, the community planning partnership, strategic commissioning plan and the children's services plan. So that gives a lot of data and details about some of the performance that we make reference to. So happy to take any questions, and just to refer these back to section 2, and it's just for the report for noting for the annual Chief Social Work Officer report. Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much. If you have any questions, could you please indicate now? I have Councillor Walker.
Thanks, Chair. It's not a question, Liam, you'll be pleased to know. Just to thank Liam for this report for the last time, and also, to remark that as usual, it's a concise outline of all of the, the achievements and the services across social work, and a lot of the transitional change that's taken place under your tutelage, Liam, ranging from the innovative intensive family support services, the family support hubs, the recovery-orientated criminal justice, as you mentioned, the technologically aided developments, for example, Blantyre Live, the tech-enabled houses, all of the rollout of that, and also the improved outcomes that have been achieved in terms of reducing the numbers of, children and young people that are in high-cost residential care into much better, family support settings. All of that is outlined in this report, and I would certainly recommend that people read it. And a lot of those services, particularly in criminal justice, have been award-winning services, and the work and dedication of the staff and the innovation has been recognised time after time in terms of the remodelling of the services, which you touched on, the locality remodelling, the advances that we've made in terms of delivering self-directed support and increasing people's choice around their own support and how they live. And working very innovatively again with the voluntary sector as well, as we touched on earlier on. All of it, and I've witnessed that in my time as a councillor, but particularly as Chair of Social Work and Chair of the IGB, and I am more than aware of the impact and the difference that all of those services make to people's lives, and indeed the expertise and input of yourself and other members of staff, you know, like Craig Cunningham, who we lost recently, and I would just kind of like to acknowledge that. And thank you for your own support to me as well as Chair of Social Work, and I wish you all the best in your retirement. You deserve it. Thanks, Liam.
Could I come now to Ross Clark?
Thank you, Chair. On a similar note, more of a comment than a question, but would like to take this opportunity on behalf of the SNP group, and I know I speak on behalf of the full committee, to thank Liam for his dedicated service to the council over the years, providing invaluable support, advice, leadership in his role. I've been able to see that since I've been elected, and I know you've been a valuable support to those in previous terms as well, and my colleagues have reiterated that point. And just to wish you all the best on a personal level as well in your retirement, so thank you very much.
Yeah. Well, thank you very much. I don't see any other questions, so can I just echo the comments that have been made earlier and the comments made by other members of the committee, and maybe just highlight, I think, particularly that piece around workforce, which I know has been a real challenge within the resource before. And it is concerning, obviously, against that backdrop that Liam's outlined of that sort of rising number of adult and child protection investigations. It is a complex area of work, and I think that we can point to tangible signs of progress. So thank you very much for the report. Can I ask the committee to note the recommendations? Thank you, and I'll wish Liam very well again for whatever comes next. For us, what comes next is not urgent business, because there are no items of urgent business. I'm now moving to item 13, which is the exclusion of the press and public. As the remaining items of business may involve the likely disclosure of exempt information in terms of paragraph 8 and 9 of Part 1 of the Schedule 7A of the Local Government Scotland Act, members are asked to agree that the press and public be excluded from the meeting for those items of business. I'm now going to ask the clerk just to ensure that there are no press or public present, and there do not appear to be, and to confirm that the recording and live streaming of this meeting has now been stopped. Okay. Can I say to members participating remotely